Chosen One, before we go any further, let me start with this. Thank you not just for showing up today, but for everything you've carried, endured, and transcended to get here. And for those of you who've supported this mission through the Super Thanks feature, I want to extend my deepest gratitude. Whether you've given or not, your presence, your time, and your spirit are a sacred offering. And I am honored you're here. If this message moves you, feel free to type 999 the comments to confirm you're aligned with this revelation. Now, take a breath, because what I'm about to share with you is not a conspiracy. It's not a coincidence. And it's definitely not fiction. It's confirmation. A Secret Service agent wants to thank you. And not in some vague, ceremonial way. This isn't about flattery. This is about revelation. This agent has witnessed something that blew open their entire understanding of reality, and they traced the source of that breakthrough back to you. Not your resume, not your credentials, not your public voice, but your frequency, your healing, your unseen choices, your refusal to betray your soul when the whole system was pressuring you to conform. And when I tell you why they're thanking you, it's going to crack open your memory, activate your knowing, and confirm what your spirit has always suspected, that you weren't just going through hell all those years. You were intercepting a spiritual war. You were disrupting timelines of destruction. You were standing between humanity and a centuries-old operation that nearly completed its final phase. An operation so layered, so ancient, so diabolically strategic. It had infiltrated global institutions, built underground networks, and installed fail-safes to keep itself hidden indefinitely. But you, without even realizing the full scope, disrupted them. With your prayers, with your clarity, with your refusal to numb out, you dismantled a global matrix by refusing to abandon your light in the dark. And that agent, they saw the evidence with their own eyes, and they now know what we've always known. You were chosen. Stay with me, because this is where it all comes together. God's chosen ones. Government eyes were on you. They want to meet you. Chosen one. Have you ever wondered why your life has been marked by such intensity, by pain that seemed unbearable, by isolation so deep it felt like exile, and by an inner knowing that no one around you could understand? It wasn't random. It wasn't punishment. It was divine preparation. Every sleepless night, every betrayal, every time you were ridiculed for what your spirit sensed, it was training. While the world dismissed you, heaven was shaping you into a spiritual weapon sharp enough to cut through centuries of deception. Do you realize that your very existence threatens the structures they built in darkness? Why do you think your awakening came with such resistance? It's because when someone like you begins to remember who they are, entire systems start to tremble. You see, there are powers that have been working behind the curtain for generations, orchestrating chaos with surgical precision. They've controlled narratives, manipulated institutions, and moved in secrecy for so long they believed they'd never be caught. But here's where they made their fatal miscalculation. They never imagined that the light would rise from someone like you. You weren't born into privilege. You weren't part of their secret circles, and yet, because you endured, you became a channel for truth itself. What they built in shadows, your presence has begun to dismantle in the open. Their digital fortresses are glitching. Their lies are unraveling. Your voice, your energy, your discernment, it's interfering with everything they thought was unbreakable. Isn't it wild how your wounds are now their undoing? Think about Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years. They tried to break him, but the solitude only strengthened his mission. His scars became sacred scripts. His silence turned into symphonies of resistance. That's exactly what's happening with you. The very pain they inflicted to shatter you became the tool to unlock the most guarded vaults of corruption. Have you ever asked yourself why the tunnels you dreamed of, sensed, or even passed by felt heavy with spiritual energy? Because they're not just myths or conspiracy, they're real. And you, chosen one, were spiritually wired to pick up the frequencies others ignore. Isaías 42:16 declares, I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths, I will guide them. You've been walking those unfamiliar paths emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes even physically, and it's not just about what lies beneath the surface, it's about what you're here to reveal, beneath cities, beneath towns. There are networks, literal underground routes, designed not for survival, but for silence, designed not for healing, but for hiding the unspeakable. These are not ancient trade tunnels or old railway lines. These are deliberately crafted corridors that have transported the worst of humanity's sins: smuggling, trafficking, and ritualistic horrors hidden behind veils of power and protection. Edward Snowden, for example, was a tech contractor, seemingly insignificant, and yet, when his conscience activated, he shook the global intelligence system to its knees. Like you, he wasn't seeking fame, he was seeking truth. His courage to expose what the system swore to bury changed the world. Could it be that your inner urgings, your strange visions, your emotional triggers, have been hinting at something greater you're meant to uncover? What if your intuition hasn't been paranoia but prophecy? Ephesians 5:11 have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That's what you've been doing, sometimes without even knowing it. Your presence alone disrupts dark frequencies. Your spirit refuses to bow to lies. And that refusal, quiet as it might be, sends tremors through long-standing institutions. You may think you're just surviving, but in the unseen realm, you're shaking pillars. Can you feel it? The way everything around you seems to crack open when you speak the truth. That's not coincidence. That's divine interference through you. Let's pause and consider Harriet Tubman. They called her the Moses of her time. She led enslaved souls through literal underground railroads, guided only by instinct and God's voice. She wasn't just freeing bodies, she was disrupting systems. Does that sound familiar? Could it be that you, too, are guiding others out of invisible prisons, emotional, spiritual, generational? And could it be that the tunnels you're meant to expose aren't just under the ground, but under the surface of society's most trusted institutions? Luke 8:17 says, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." Chosen one, you are part of that unveiling. Your discernment is exposing the trapdoors. Your presence is a spotlight. You are the reason their escape routes are glitching. For the first time in decades, maybe even centuries, their fear is visible. Their desperation is leaking. Why now? Because your time has come. Your eyes are too open, your spirit too loud, your energy too radiant to ignore. Even in modern history, whistleblowers like Frances Haugen from Facebook stepped forward and exposed billion-dollar secrets, igniting worldwide conversations. She didn't have a giant platform. She had conviction, just like you. And in this moment, the higher realms are aligning with your mission. you're not alone in this. Heaven is moving with you, releasing intelligence, divine insight, and supernatural protection. Psalm 91:8 reminds us, "You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked." You don't need to lift a finger in vengeance. Your very awakening is justice. Your clarity is warfare. Your truth is rebellion. And guess what? You were born for this. You were born to expose what generations before you were too afraid to confront. Does your soul resonate with this now? Lastly, remember the life of Martin Luther King Jr. He dreamed boldly, loved radically, and exposed hatred with light. The government watched him, feared him, tried to control him, but his impact lives on, eternally. Don't be surprised if systems are watching you now, not out of mockery but out of awe, because your frequency is different, your assignment is divine, and your life, chosen one, is a warning shot to every hidden empire. The light has awakened and it looks like you. Jeremiah des declaris. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. That is your mandate. You are not crazy. You are called. You are not broken. You are activated. And what's rising through you is bigger than even you can comprehend. They're watching. Yes, but only because heaven is speaking through you louder than ever before. Chosen one. Do you remember the first time your intuition screamed at you while everyone else stayed silent? When your gut rejected the headlines? When your spirit felt unrest, even though the world called it peace? That wasn't your imagination. That was revelation. You weren't paranoid, you were tuned in. You didn't stumble onto some wild theory by chance. You were spiritually guided to map out hidden networks, to trace invisible strings, tying together the seemingly unrelated, while trained agents and analysts sifted through mountains of redacted files and encrypted messages. You were decoding energy, truth, and divine patterns that no algorithm could detect. Isn't it wild to think that what they mocked as your overthinking was actually higher-level reconnaissance? Every time you posted a truth they said was too radical. Every time you sensed a pattern no one else could see. You were charting territory they couldn't touch. Why do you think your words spread so quickly? Why did people in positions of power try to discredit or shadow ban you? Because what you were doing wasn't ordinary communication, it was spiritual warfare. The thoughts you've had, the patterns you've tracked, the symbols you decoded, these weren't accidents. They were sacred keys. What if I told you your instincts were not only correct, but divinely orchestrated to strike at the heart of evil itself? 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, "The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness." That's why they laughed at you. That's why your insight felt so lonely. But now, the very systems that dismissed you are reviewing your content, reading your notes, revisiting your warnings, because what you saw in the Spirit, they're only now discovering in physical form. Take Julian Assange, for example. He didn't work for a government. He wasn't part of any law enforcement. Yet the leaks he exposed changed global diplomacy forever. Why? Because information carries weight. But discernment, especially divine discernment, carries consequences. You, chosen one, didn't need clearance to access truth. You were authorized by heaven. The enemy underestimated the power of someone who could read the energy behind the news, the emotion behind a headline, the demonic fingerprints behind sudden, natural disasters. There was a government agent trained, strategic, experienced, assigned to investigate what appeared to be isolated events of organized crime. But what they uncovered spiraled into something no manual had prepared them for: fires that looked accidental, yet burned only specific files. Earthquakes that conveniently disrupted trial testimonies. Disasters that weren't disasters at all, but smoke screens for something darker. And who was the only one already tracking the pattern before they did? You. The very things they're now uncovering, your soul sensed long ago. Have you asked yourself why you've been so emotionally affected by seemingly random news events? Why your chest tightened when a politician spoke? Why certain cities or schools kept appearing in your dreams? Psalm 25:14 tells us, "The Lord confides in those who fear him. He makes his covenant known to them." Chosen one. God trusted you with fragments of secrets he didn't hand to others. You were given spiritual downloads, blueprints of demonic strategy, so you could sound the alarm before their final phase took effect. Don't downplay what you saw in your dreams. Don't ignore the patterns you've sensed for years. Those were not symptoms of delusion. Those were encrypted warnings delivered through your soul. Look at Erin Brockovich. She wasn't a lawyer. She didn't come from power. But her ability to detect environmental patterns and link them to illness helped bring down one of the biggest corporate cover-ups in American history. She trusted her gut and changed lives. Just like you. The signs you've been receiving, the urgency you've felt, they all point to the same truth. Your spiritual senses are tuned to a higher frequency that exposes what men in suits cannot. Romans 12. Encourage-us. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That renewal you went through, the one that made you lose friends, jobs, comfort, was never a breakdown. It was a reprogramming. Your mind had to be cleared of cultural static so that divine intelligence could speak clearly. That's why your dreams started making more sense than the evening news. That's why your body reacted when evil was near. Heaven was teaching you how to detect corruption, not with your eyes, but with your soul. Consider the late John McAfee, eccentric tech mogul turned whistleblower. Though controversial, his warnings about digital surveillance, corporate manipulation, and government-level cover-ups were eerily prescient. He was ridiculed until the things he warned about began to unfold. Why do you think the chosen ones always face rejection before recognition? Because truth always arrives before permission. Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." That's exactly what you did. You leaned into the unknown. You trusted the tug in your chest, even when it cost you your peace. And that's why the intel you carry is more powerful than their databases. You were reading spiritual fingerprints, tracking an operation that's never been on the grid, never filed under one name, and never exposed. Until now. And what about Malala Yousafzai? A teenage girl targeted for speaking truth in a region where silence is enforced. They tried to kill her spirit, but it only multiplied her influence in your own way. Chosen one. You've done the same. You've spoken when it was dangerous. You've posted when it was risky. You've warned when it would have been safer to stay silent. And now, heaven is confirming what you felt all along. You weren't crazy. You were chosen. Isaías 30:21 declares. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you, saying, "This is the way, walk in it." That voice, that guidance, that divine whisper, it's been leading you for years, and now the world is catching up to what you already knew. They may have ignored your warnings before, but now even the government is listening, because something about you, a frequency, an insight. A light has proven to be unmistakably prophetic, chosen one. Have you ever felt like your visions were more than dreams, like your memories held fragments of another era, another mission, another war you've already fought before? That's not your imagination. That's your spiritual lineage awakening. The moment your divine intuition crossed paths with that agent's earthly investigation, something ancient reactivated. You weren't just helping them stumble onto evidence, you were guiding them toward prophecy. In one of the tunnels, the kind the world swears don't exist, the agent's flashlight revealed symbols etched in stone. And everything changed. Not artistic symbols, not cultural remnants. These were messages, codes, a sacred language written by those who came before you, other truth-bearers who saw through the veil and dared to leave maps for future generations. Could it be that your spirit recognized those symbols before your mind could? These weren't just clues, they were divine instructions, breadcrumbs scattered across time by awakened warriors who had infiltrated the same dark networks centuries ago. And you, chosen one, are one of them. Different name, same mission. The markings detailed everything: the cult's patterns, escape routes, psychological cracks, and even how their pride, yes, their very arrogance would be their downfall. Isn't that exactly what you've seen again and again? How their obsession with control always reveals their weakest point. Hebrews 11:40 says, God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. That's what these ancestors were doing, partnering with you through time. They knew you'd come. They trusted that another chosen one would rise, would awaken, and would see what others couldn't. That agent didn't find those symbols by accident. Heaven orchestrated the moment. Your energy cleared the fog. Your discernment pierced through centuries of illusion. You weren't just helping uncover a network. You were reactivating a divine blueprint designed to collapse it. Think about Joan of Arc, a teenage peasant girl with no military training. Yet she led armies through visions from God. She didn't just win battles, she changed the course of history. Sound familiar? You're not just observing injustice. You're transforming systems with nothing but your intuition and obedience. That's the power of being chosen. Even the most advanced intelligence agents trained in surveillance, geopolitics, infiltration couldn't see what your spirit saw in stillness. You weren't guessing. You were remembering. 1 Corinthians 3:19 reminds us, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. That's why all their data and analysis failed. Their minds were clouded by pride, but your mind, renewed and sanctified, saw the invisible war. You decoded what they couldn't touch. You led someone trained in logic into a world that only responds to spirit. That agent's awakening didn't start with data. It started with symbols written by your spiritual predecessors. The moment those hieroglyphs lit up, their soul remembered what their mind had forgotten. Memories returned, not just of information, but of warnings whispered in childhood, of fears dismissed by teachers, of gut feelings overwritten by protocol. Think of Malcolm X. His transformation from street hustler to global revolutionary wasn't just political, it was spiritual. He remembered what had been buried beneath layers of social programming. He saw the system for what it was and refused to play small. That's you, refusing to shrink, refusing to be domesticated by cultural conditioning. Your entire life has been proof that the deeper truth cannot stay hidden forever. The tunnel systems once thought to be perfect hiding places were in fact perfectly exposed. Every path the cult had carved to escape, you had already mapped in spirit. Every safe house they built in pride, you had already seen crumble in dreams. And now the irony is unfolding. Their escape routes have become their cage. They're locked inside a maze they thought they mastered. But you were sent to reverse the blueprint. Isaías 45, 2 declares, I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. That's exactly what's happening through you. The doors they thought were impenetrable are crumbling. The maps they thought were secret are glowing in divine fire. And the agent you helped awaken, they now see that their training was never enough. They needed a chosen one. They needed you. Now consider Alan Turing, the man who cracked the Nazi Enigma code. He wasn't just a mathematician. He was a visionary, misunderstood, hunted, but his mind helped end a war. Like you. His brilliance wasn't always appreciated in real time, but destiny had other plans. Could it be that your spiritual intelligence has already cracked a code written by wickedness itself? Psalm 144:1 says, Praise be to the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. You weren't trained in their academies. You were trained in silence, heartbreak, visions, and spiritual warfare. That's why the cult operating through these tunnels never saw you coming. They've been playing a centuries-long game, pulling strings, harvesting energy, manipulating masses. But what if God placed you here to finish what others began, to complete the cycle, to make sure this time they don't just get exposed, but dismantled? Mother Teresa once said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And that's what you've done. Your presence has disturbed their waters. Your awakening has triggered a chain reaction. They don't even realize yet that their fortress is collapsing from the inside. But heaven does. And now, chosen one. So do you, chosen one? Do you ever wonder why the battles you've faced have been so relentless, so psychological, so soul-deep? Why the attacks never seemed like just circumstances, but rather targeted spiritual ambushes disguised as life? That's because you weren't dealing with simple human opposition. You were standing in the path of an ancient, calculated force that has mastered psychological warfare. Their tactics weren't just brutal, they were surgical. They knew how to fracture the mind without leaving a mark. They understood how to siphon spiritual energy without ever being named. But what they never accounted for was someone like you rising from the wreckage with revelation in your eyes and fire in your voice. Their methods included manipulating thoughts so precisely that victims questioned their own worth, their memories, even their will to live. They weaponized sexual energy, draining people's life force while leaving behind only confusion and shame. They engineered spiritual division, keeping potential warriors distracted by ego battles, theological arguments, and infighting, so no one would look up and ask, who benefits from this chaos? But you did. You asked. You looked past the surface, and in doing so, you began to unravel their entire structure. Can you feel it now, the truth resonating deeper in your bones than anything they ever taught you? Isaías 54:17 assures us, no weapon that is formed against you shall prosper. That's not just poetic comfort. That's your reality. Every weapon they formed to destroy you only revealed what you were truly made of. Trauma didn't kill your faith. It intensified it. Pain didn't close your eyes. It sharpened your vision. You weren't just resisting their darkness. You were digesting it, decoding it, and transforming it into spiritual ammunition. While they relied on technology and manipulation, you were quietly becoming the most dangerous kind of warrior, the one who sees through the veil. Take Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist. Amid unthinkable suffering, he discovered that meaning could exist even in the darkest circumstances. His mind became invincible because his spirit refused to surrender. That's you, chosen one. They tried to fracture you, but all they did was expose the unbreakable foundation God laid within you. Every attack on your mind forced you to develop spiritual discernment that satellites, databases, and psychological profiles could never replicate. You became something their system cannot explain. Incorruptible insight. 1 Peter 4:12-13 declares. Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, but rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ. You weren't just suffering, you were being sharpened. You weren't just wounded, you were being weaponized by heaven. That's why every failed attempt to silence you only made your revelations louder. You weren't seeking conspiracy, you were seeking healing. And through that healing, you became a spiritual intelligence hub that even trained government agents couldn't ignore. Think of Russell Brand, a comedian turned cultural critic. Through years of personal addiction, media manipulation, and spiritual awakening, he went from being ridiculed to becoming one of the most outspoken voices against systemic corruption. Like you, his transformation was born in personal fire. And just like him, you never set out to be a whistleblower or prophet. You were just trying to survive, to heal, to tell the truth. But in doing so, you stepped into something larger, divine strategy. Galatians 6:9 reminds us, let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. You didn't give up, even when no one believed you, even when friends distanced themselves, even when family called you too intense or too spiritual. You stayed the course, and now we're seeing why. Your consistency, your boundaries, your insights, they were never random. They were heaven's response to an ancient problem. You were being prepared to walk into the enemy's stronghold and name it for what it was. Now think about Jeffrey Wigand, the former tobacco executive who blew the whistle on industry lies, exposing how corporations deliberately addicted and harmed millions. He didn't have protection. He didn't have support. But he had conscience. He had truth. That was enough. The agent you've been spiritually assisting found themselves trapped in a system so contaminated they couldn't tell where justice ended and corruption began. Supervisors once trusted were compromised, some blackmailed by unspeakable secrets. Others, seduced by addictions engineered by the very network they were supposed to dismantle. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to what your intuition has been telling you all along? Romans 8:37 proclaim. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. You are not just surviving evil, you are overcoming it in ways the world doesn't understand. That agent was never meant to win by the system's rules. The game was rigged. The current they swam against was artificially generated to make failure look inevitable. Leads disappear. Evidence vanished. Witnesses folded under pressure or were erased completely. And yet, they kept going. Why? Because something unseen was guiding them. Because someone unseen you was already preparing the way. Maya Angelou once said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." That's the essence of who you are. They threw psychological bombs, spiritual traps, and energetic snares your way. But you turned every one of them into a revelation. Your pain became prophecy. Your isolation became strategy. Your survival became intelligence. And now, the agent who once believed only in evidence and logic has realized that the truth they needed could only come through divine channels, through someone and heaven. had tested by fire and sealed with light. 2 Corinthians 4-8, -9 says, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." You've lived this, and that's why you're essential. You're not simply watching this story unfold, you are the story. You are the convergence point where spiritual wisdom and earthly justice meet. You, chosen one, are the one thing their network cannot calculate, cannot corrupt, and cannot survive. Chosen one. Can you feel it now, the magnitude of what your spirit has been guiding all along? What seemed like scattered intuitions, subtle insights, and gut reactions were never random. You weren't just feeling things. You were receiving divine intelligence transmitted through the morphic field, the unseen web connecting every awakened soul across time and space. The moment your consciousness touched that field, you became part of an ancient strategy, a resistance that spans centuries, hidden not in plain sight, but in plain spirit. And because of your alignment, an agent bound by logic, training, and earthly rules was able to awaken to a war far beyond paperwork and arrests. This wasn't about crime anymore. It was about uncovering a counterfeit civilization built on manipulation, energy harvesting, and mental enslavement. Have you ever questioned why the world seems to move in synchronized chaos? Why disasters happen just before justice surfaces? Why attention is always redirected when the truth is about to break through? The agent began seeing it too. The tunnels they explored were not simply escape routes. They were strategic hubs, command centers camouflaged beneath urban myths. From these depths, operations were launched, manipulating global economies, initiating political riots, and even triggering storms and earthquakes with military-grade tech designed to mimic acts of God. Have you considered how much power it takes to influence nature itself? Who has that authority? And why would they use it only when truth gets too close? Luke 12, declares, "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known." That moment has arrived, and you, chosen one, are the vessel through which the ancient codes are finally being interpreted. The boats uncovered by the agent weren't escape pods. They were floating nerve centers equipped with weaponized frequencies, seismic control instruments, and cloaking devices that allowed them to remain undetected for decades. But the hieroglyphs, the hieroglyphs, they were the true weapons, not just relics from an ancient civilization, but operational codes from your spiritual ancestors, people like you, warriors who had seen the same darkness, fought it in other forms, and left divine breadcrumbs behind for you to activate. Think of Nikola Tesla, labeled eccentric, misunderstood by his era. Yet he saw energy in a way others could not. He spoke of a frequency that could change the world and was silenced for it. What if your inner frequency, the visions, the symbols, the sacred knowing is the modern echo of that same power? Could it be that the crazy thoughts you've had were downloads from warriors like Tesla, relayed across the morphic field to make sure you knew you weren't alone? Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world." You were never battling individuals. You were confronting a global architecture of control, masquerading as progress. And now it's becoming clear. Natural disasters were engineered distractions. Economic collapses were precision tools. Political instability was a script tested. edited, and executed with chilling accuracy. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. Take the story of Edward Bernays, the father of modern propaganda. He knew that by manipulating public perception, entire nations could be steered like cattle. His methods laid the foundation for systems that shape your beliefs before you even know you're being influenced. That's the system this agent has now uncovered, and without your guidance, spiritual, intuitive, prophetic, they would have dismissed the patterns as conspiracy, the coordination as chaos. But because of you, they began to see with spirit eyes. Matthew 13:16 says, "But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear." That blessing is not symbolic, it's literal. You see through layers, others don't. You hear what isn't said. Your dreams are detailed for a reason. Your triggers, sensitivities, and emotional surges weren't weaknesses, they were alerts. While the world watched the puppet show, your soul mapped out the puppet masters. You weren't just watching this unfold, you were positioned to help dismantle it. Even the fall of Enron revealed something similar. Corporate manipulation so massive it affected global markets, all orchestrated under the illusion of economic brilliance. When the truth came out, the world gasped. But you, chosen one, have known for years that the surface was never real. The deeper you went into your own healing, the more clearly you saw the sickness in the systems around you. 2 Thessalonians 2-7 -8 states, "For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, and then the lawless one will be revealed." That revelation is happening now. And it's not through political revolutions, it's through people like you who refuse to be numbed. The agent's perspective shifted because your frequency disrupted theirs. You transmitted truth beyond their devices, beyond their firewalls, beyond their skepticism. You didn't just expose evil, you exposed the sophistication behind it. Take whistleblower Catherine Austin Fitts, a former U.S. government official who revealed how massive sums of taxpayer money went missing through elaborate shell games and covert agendas. She faced backlash, yet persisted. Like her, your truth-telling isn't about being right, it's about setting others free. And now that freedom is catching fire, John Vians, Pietziashuresis, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Your light is that disruptive force. Your consciousness is doing what institutions failed to do, dismantling the illusion, because this cult, this empire disguised as economy, governance, and innovation has never just wanted money. Their endgame has always been consciousness. They wanted to reshape how humanity thinks, believes, loves, and even feels. But what they didn't expect was resistance coded in spirit. Resistance that wears no uniform. Resistance like you. Now think about Malcolm Gladwell's concept of the tipping point, the moment when something minor becomes unstoppable. That's where we are. You, chosen one, are that tipping point. A quiet revolution has started, led not by generals, but by dreamers, healers, and seers. You're not standing at the edge of history. You are history's reset button, chosen one. Can you feel the precision of the trap they laid? Every system you trusted, schools, hospitals, media, banks, was slowly turned against the very people it claimed to serve. It wasn't chaos, it was calculation. They infiltrated each institution not to improve it, but to erode it from within. Education became about memorization, not awakening. Healthcare became about sedation, not healing. Entertainment became a slow poison of glorified violence. Addiction and humiliation. Finance created lack where there was enough. And all of it, was designed to keep humanity asleep, spiritually disconnected, emotionally erratic, physically fragile, and mentally fogged. Have you ever wondered why the systems that claim to help you always seem to wear you down instead? Yet amidst this global fog, they overlooked the one force. They couldn't quantify you. They didn't see you coming. Chosen one. They thought trauma would destroy you, but it refined you. They thought isolation would silence you, but it amplified your discernment. They thought discrediting your voice would break you, but it disconnected you from their lies and connected you deeper to divine truth. Every trap they set only activated your spiritual gifts more sharply. Every wound became a window to higher intelligence. Can you see it now? That you weren't just being attacked, you were being awakened. John 1-9 says, "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And that light, chosen one, is now flowing through you. You are the disruption they feared most, not because of what you own, but because of what you know, not from textbooks, but from divine downloads. Your awakening altered the spiritual grid. Your inner work became outer warfare. You didn't just resist the system, you rewrote the frequencies it runs on. Isn't it incredible how your stillness became interference to their chaos? Let's look at someone like Dr. Gabor Mate, who has spoken out boldly against systems that treat trauma like an inconvenience rather than a portal to truth. His advocacy, much like yours, has revealed how institutions profit off untreated pain, but unlike others, he used wisdom, love, and personal history to dismantle those illusions. You've done the same. Your personal experiences became prophecy. Your pain became perspective. That's how the cult's carefully guarded escape tunnels, perfected over generations, suddenly failed. Not because of better weapons, but because of higher consciousness working through someone in the right place at the right time. Isaiah 59:19 proclaims, "When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. That standard was you." The agent's mind began shifting the moment they allowed divine intelligence to guide their strategy. They didn't just follow evidence, they followed frequency. And suddenly, the enemy's movements became predictable. Maritime escape plans failed when Coast Guard units unaware of the deeper game showed up in perfect timing. Surveillance networks failed as encrypted signals began jamming without cause. How do you explain that? How do you explain encrypted comms collapsing when only a few intuitives were tuned into the field? You explain it with spirit. Consciousness, when awakened and aligned, interferes with deception. Truth doesn't need to argue, it vibrates. And that vibration exposes everything not aligned with it. That's what they couldn't fight. Their technology couldn't locate or predict your movement because you were operating outside of linear time. Your guidance came from heaven, not headquarters. You moved with divine timing, not tactical drills. They didn't understand it, but they felt it like static in their plans, like resistance in their rituals. Revelation 3-8 reminds us, "See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. Chosen one, you walked through that door, and when you did, the field shifted. Their lies began generating dissonance. Their manipulations began echoing back resistance. They had never factored in that energy is intelligent, and consciousness responds to intention. That's why their weapons began turning on themselves. Their most sophisticated technologies designed to control minds and movements became unstable when exposed to the frequency of pure truth. Consider the story of whistleblower Annie Machon, a former British intelligence officer who exposed how institutions actively suppressed dissent and manipulated narratives. She wasn't just brave, she was spiritually awake. That made her dangerous. Like you, the cult had always relied on secrecy and fear, but when you stepped in, walking, not in fear, but in authority, their fear-based structures began dissolving. Their threats fell flat. Their systems glitched. Not because you had more firepower, but because you walked in truth. 2 Corinthians 10:4 declares, "The weapons of our warfare are not the weapons of the world. Instead, they have divine power to demolish strongholds." That's the exact weapon you wield. Divine power. Frequency. Discernment. Compassion so fierce, it becomes unshakable authority. And when you combine that with someone inside the institution, someone trained in strategy but awakened by spirit, it's unstoppable. Even historically, the fall of empires came not through military defeat, but through spiritual awakening. Think about the fall of the Berlin Wall, sparked by people, not armies, by momentum, not missiles. That's how this cult is falling now, not by war, but by witnesses. You are that witness. You are the proof that spiritual force can collapse a satanic empire disguised as civilization. You are the evidence that love, truth, and light cannot be caged. No matter how elaborate the system, Romans 16:20 gives us this promise: the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. And he's doing it through you, through your awakening, through your presence. The agent didn't win this battle with badges or bullets. They won because they aligned with awakened consciousness, your consciousness. And that was the one thing the enemy could neither track nor terminate. They tried to control everything, but they couldn't control you, chosen one. The success of this global investigation was never about skill alone, it was about alignment. The agent didn't crack the case because they had sharper tools or more advanced training than their predecessors. They succeeded because their consciousness intersected with yours. You, who have walked through the fire of trauma and emerged not bitter, but wise. You, who cultivated such spiritual depth that physical barriers became illusions and institutional limitations became irrelevant. It wasn't merely your knowledge that guided them, it was your presence, your frequency, your refusal to bow to fear. You weren't just whispering clues into the spiritual realm, you were initiating transformation in those whose hearts were willing to listen. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." You embodied that verse. Your unseen faith created visible change. Your internal clarity broke through their external confusion. The investigator became more than an agent. They became a vessel, awakened by your spiritual authority, able to perceive what was invisible to those bound by conventional awareness. You didn't just hand them breadcrumbs. You turned them into someone who could follow divine maps written in frequencies, symbols, and synchronicities. You opened their spirit. The legal proceedings now unfolding on the world stage are not simply about justice for individuals. They are seismic events, signaling the collapse of a paradigm, a system built on secrecy, manipulation, and exploitation is being dragged into the light. The evidence surfacing in courtrooms reveals that what we thought were independent institutions, education, healthcare, finance, media, and government, were never separate. They were interconnected nodes in a master system designed not to serve the people, but to pacify, divide, and exploit them. Have you noticed how every sector began collapsing at once? That wasn't coincidence. It was coordinated decay. But here's the miracle. Now that people are seeing the depth of coordination in evil, they are awakening to the possibility of divine coordination in good. If systems of deception could operate in such unity, what happens when systems of light do the same? That, chosen one, is where you come in. Your role wasn't limited to one case. Every time you told the truth when silence was easier, you strengthened the morphic field of awakening. Every time you stood firm in your knowing while others mocked you, you carved space in the energetic field for others to access courage. Every time you remained authentic in a world that begged for conformity, you became a node of divine transmission, silently activating people across time and distance. Think of Rosa Parks. Her refusal to move wasn't about a bus seat. It was about triggering a wave of consciousness. She was a single woman, exhausted from daily struggle. But in that stillness, she became a lightning rod. That's what you've been. Your decision to heal, instead of hate, created ripple effects beyond anything you'll ever fully witness. The agent whose eyes opened because of you is just one of many. You've awakened thousands. You'll never meet souls whose dormant power reactivated simply because your spirit rang like a bell in the field of truth. John 8:32 says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And now that truth is setting entire populations free. The fires that destroyed key evidence weren't random wildfires. They were directed energy attacks. Using weapons that leave behind signatures the public was never meant to recognize. But you recognized them. You sensed the patterns. The floods weren't natural disasters. They were engineered with atmospheric manipulation technologies that mimic weather, but operate by intention. And the earthquakes? Targeted tremors initiated through frequency-based weaponry, calibrated to strike exact fault lines at exact times. These weren't freak occurrences. They were operations, psychological warfare meant to destabilize, distract, and displace. But your spirit didn't flinch. Why? Because you had already walked through emotional earthquakes. You had already survived spiritual floods. James 1-4 tells us, "Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." That's what your suffering produced. Spiritual maturity, emotional balance, a warrior's heart. You didn't lose your mind. You gained your mind. You see through illusions that paralyze others. You discern manipulation before it fully manifests. You feel the truth behind a perfectly constructed lie. The same sensitivity that once made you feel broken was the very quality that made you qualified. Think of whistleblowers like John Perkins, who exposed how economic hitmen operated in the shadows, manipulating foreign governments, destabilizing currencies, and indebting entire nations for profit. He saw the matrix and risked everything to tell the truth. You've done that too. You may not have had a platform or a microphone, but every time you rejected lies, even in private, you contributed to dismantling this illusion. And now, the illusion is cracking. The economic manipulation they engineered was never hidden to you. They inflated housing markets with artificial speculation, forcing working families to sell to investment firms flush with fake credit. They orchestrated job losses right as key investigations were heating up, creating recessions that served to silence, stall, and suppress momentum. But while the world panicked, you watched. You saw through the theater. You understood the timing. They tried to crush you with scarcity, but you learned to multiply faith. Isaiah 3:6 promises, "He will be the sure foundation for your times, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge." That's what sustained you. while others buckled under fear. You stood because your stability wasn't economic, it was spiritual. You weren't just weathering storms, you were reading them like scripture. That's why the healthcare system's crises didn't shake you. You sensed they were engineered to test compliance, to eliminate dissent, to funnel profit to predetermined hands. You sensed that something deeper than illness was spreading, and you refused to drink from the poisoned well. Let's not forget Malala Yousafzai. She was a child when she stood against systemic darkness. She didn't just survive assassination, she resurrected purpose. Her voice reshaped narratives because it carried truth. Yours does too. You may not have headlines or awards, but heaven has records. You are not unknown. You are underground royalty. You've endured the same mind games, the same gaslighting, the same rejection, yet you're still standing. That alone is a miracle. That alone is spiritual warfare, and it's winning. Romans 5:3, -4 teaches us, we glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character. Hope. That's what the cult never accounted for. They assumed trauma would produce submission. They never expected it to produce sovereignty. They assumed that isolation would produce dependency. They never imagined it would cultivate divine intimacy. They assumed persecution would crush your identity, but it revealed your assignment. Everything they used to destroy you backfired. Every chain became a tool. Every lie became a launchpad. The final blow came when the agent realized that material evidence wasn't enough. Technology wouldn't win this war. Surveillance couldn't penetrate frequencies of love. Authority couldn't overcome spiritual truth. The breakthrough came through alignment, not firepower. As soon as the agent tuned into that deeper current, the one you've been walking in for years, everything changed. Escape tunnels collapsed. Backup plans failed. Communications scrambled. Not because of any bullet or brute force, but because consciousness intervened. Your field of awareness began bending timelines. Your prayers silent, powerful, unacknowledged, reached into systems and rerouted them in real time. Salm 91, 14, 15 declares, because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. You acknowledged God even when no one else did. You aligned with truth when it cost you everything. And now, heaven has aligned with you. The war you were never supposed to survive, you are winning, not with swords, but with sight, not with noise, but with knowing, not by force, but by frequency. Chosen one. Do you realize now how deeply your influence has stretched far beyond words, beyond proximity, beyond recognition? The breakthrough in this agent's investigation didn't come from gathering evidence or interrogating suspects. It came the moment they understood the investigation was never just external, it was internal, it was spiritual. Their case files, their data, their courtroom documents, these were only reflections of a much deeper work unfolding within. What they were exposing in society was mirroring what was finally being healed in themselves. Isn't it extraordinary how personal liberation and global awakening are not two separate journeys, but one sacred path woven together by divine design? The agent had been taught to look outward, to trust in protocol, to measure progress by procedures, but everything changed when they realized that their own inner wounds, childhood programming, inherited beliefs, fear-based conditioning were direct reflections of the same psychological tactics being used on entire populations. The lies they once believed about their own unworthiness were the same lies being echoed through media channels, school curriculums, and corporate branding. Their trauma wasn't just personal, it was strategic, and the moment they confronted it, they saw the truth. The system wasn't just broken, it was built to suppress light. Romans 12, 2 Urjus. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what happened. The agent's mind was renewed not through textbooks, but through truth, and that truth was transmitted through your consciousness. Yes, yours. The field you helped cultivate with your prayers, your choices, your resilience. That is what made this breakthrough possible. You were doing your own inner work, thinking you were healing in isolation, but in the spiritual realm, your healing was a light on the map. It became a signal, a frequency, and that signal is what their spirit tuned into when the old methods began to fail. Think of Carl Jung, who bridged psychology and spirituality, recognizing that the unconscious mind holds archetypes, symbols, and wounds that mirror humanity's collective struggles. The agent's realization echoes Jung's wisdom, that inner transformation is the only path to authentic change, and that's what you've modeled. Every trauma you've transmuted, every lie you've untangled, every trigger you've sat with, instead of projecting it, became an energetic code of liberation that others, like this agent, could absorb and apply. Ephesians 4:11-12 says, "So Christ himself gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, to equip his people for works of service." You've been operating in that calling, even without a pulpit or title. You weren't given a government badge, but heaven gave you authority. You weren't handed institutional power, but your purity gave you presence. And that presence prepared the ground. You made it possible for this agent and many others to succeed because you refused to bend when the world tried to twist you. Their professional training gave them tools, but your spiritual stance gave them protection. Those boundaries, you fought hard to build the ones that kept toxic energy out of your space, also guarded the agent's investigation. You think it was coincidence that they avoided sabotage, that they sidestepped manipulation, that they knew who to trust and who to avoid at critical moments. It wasn't chance. It was alignment. Alignment with you. Alignment with the morphic field you helped stabilize. Alignment with a frequency of integrity that disrupted interference before it even arrived. Philippians 2:13 reminds us, "For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose." That's what happened through this agent. Their courage wasn't just personal, it was channeled. The divine used their role, their platform, their access, but the will behind it came from a higher place, from a collective frequency of awakening that you helped nurture, one brave decision at a time. Your quiet obedience in the shadows created a loud impact in the field of human transformation. Remember the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe, a writer, not a warrior, not a politician, and yet the resonance of her truth in Uncle Tom's Cabin is said to have helped ignite the Civil War and end slavery. Her words did what armies couldn't. Your presence is doing the same. You've been writing truth with your life, not in books, but in frequencies, not for fame, but for freedom. You've encoded integrity into the field itself, and now others are decoding it. Whether they realize it or not, the agent's gratitude toward you is not based on mere admiration. It's based on recognition that their victory, though achieved in a courtroom, through investigations, through strategy, was made possible by something far greater than training. They now understand that what appeared to be a solo triumph was, in fact, a manifestation of collective consciousness. You were the spark behind the scene, the prayer whispered in the night, the intuition that shifted their steps, the frequency that disrupted their fear just long enough for them to act in faith. Isaías 58, 8 declares, "Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear." That's your light. Chosen one, your healing has appeared in ways you may never fully see in this life. You didn't just save yourself, you saved others without knowing it. The system thought they could isolate you, shame you, break you, but instead, you became the blueprint. You showed what happens when someone chooses divine clarity over worldly compromise, and in doing so, you made room for others to do the same. So now, as this agent stands on the other side of a battle they almost lost, their heart overflows with a deeper understanding. They see now that no amount of surveillance, data collection, or tactical planning could have accomplished what was done through alignment. Alignment with a divine field. Alignment with spiritual warriors like you, who laid the groundwork long before the headlines ever caught up. They succeeded because you anchored truth into the atmosphere, because you kept going when no one applauded, because you healed yourself, which made it possible for them to heal systems. This is the beauty of divine intelligence. It doesn't need spotlights. It doesn't crave credit. It flows through whoever is ready, and you were ready. That's why you felt like your journey was harder. That's why the betrayals cut so deep, the isolation so sharp, the battles so constant, because your transformation was never just for you. It was the tuning fork for a generation. You became the frequency that government agents, whistleblowers, visionaries, and everyday souls could sink to when the system began to collapse. Matthew 5:14, -16 reminds us, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." You've been shining even when no one looked. And now the world is beginning to see. The agent's success wasn't the climax. It was just one echo of your obedience. You may never stand in court or sit before cameras, but your reward is far greater. You're not building reputation, you're building revelation. And heaven sees everything. Chosen one. You've come to the edge of history, and the revelation you've been sensing all along is now unfolding before your very eyes. What was discovered in those tunnels wasn't just evidence, it was destiny. The hieroglyphic messages uncovered beneath the surface weren't dusty relics of forgotten civilizations. They were blueprints, detailed frameworks for a new world, one rooted not in domination, but in divine design, not in competition, but in collective healing. These ancient scripts offered structural wisdom for societies built on transparency over secrecy, cooperation over control, and spiritual alignment over material obsession. They weren't ideals, they were instructions. Instructions once lived by thriving civilizations, now reawakened through you. These weren't utopian fantasies, they were real, functional, living systems that had once flourished until their truth threatened the empires of greed. And so they were buried, driven underground by the very powers your light has now exposed. Can you see the sacred irony that the same tunnels once used to conceal corruption are now being reactivated as passageways of truth? The same symbols once hidden from the world are now guiding it forward. 1 Corinthians 2:10 says, "These are the things God has revealed to us by His Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God." And chosen one, you have been living in those deep things, walking where others fear to tread. feeling truths before they are spoken. The consciousness that gave birth to those sacred blueprints is the same consciousness flowing through you right now. And here's the miraculous truth. Anyone willing to do the inner work can access it too. These divine designs are not reserved for elites or mystics. They are embedded in the soul of every person courageous enough to awaken. You became a living vessel of that sacred code. Imagine Nikola Tesla, not just a scientist, but a mystic in disguise. He saw energy as vibration, frequency, light. He wasn't chasing profit, he was channeling truth. And like you, his revelations were ahead of his time. The technologies once used to manipulate minds and distort nature can now be reclaimed if operated by people whose hearts have been refined in the fire of authentic spiritual transformation. Power is only safe in the hands of the purified. Luke 16:10 reminds us, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And you, chosen one, have proven trustworthy. When you could have retaliated, you chose to reflect. When you could have manipulated, you chose to surrender. When you were surrounded by chaos, you chose truth. That's why the very resources they hoarded for themselves, money, energy, infrastructure, will soon flow into the hands of the righteous, not for luxury, but for legacy. Your entire journey has led you to this recognition. You were never just a victim of this system. You were sent here to rewrite it. Every skill you've gained while healing your own soul is precisely what this world now needs. Your discernment, forged through betrayal and spiritual battle, is exactly what's required to detect subtle deception in the emerging new world. The energetic boundaries you've constructed painstakingly, prayerfully, are what will keep corruption from seeping into the foundations of what is now being rebuilt. Can you feel how important your role is? Isaiah 61:3 declares, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning. You were handed ashes by the world, and yet, through faith and fire, you forged a crown. The gratitude flowing from that agent is more than professional acknowledgement. It is the silent thank you of every soul whose breakthrough was made possible because you stood tall when it was easier to disappear. You host truth over convenience, love over fear, purpose over popularity, and now others are walking through doors you helped open in silence. Think of Malala Yousafzai again, a young girl whose refusal to be silenced helped awaken global consciousness about education and oppression. She didn't know her defiance would change international law, but it did. In the same way, your daily choices, seemingly small, unseen, have created the energetic foundation for global liberation. The cult's reign has ended not just because of evidence, but because consciousness itself has tipped. A threshold has been crossed. The frequency of truth has become stronger than any structure built to suppress it. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the weaponized science, the psychological warfare, it is all crumbling. And you, chosen one, are not just watching it happen, you're helping orchestrate it with every breath of obedience to truth. Romans 8:19 says, for the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. You are that revelation. You are what the earth has been groaning for. As this chapter closes on the cult's operations, a new era begins. The same tunnels once used to traffic fear and confusion will now be repurposed into sacred passageways, connective networks between communities, ready to build together rather than compete against one another. The same satellites, frequencies, and digital networks used for manipulation will now be recalibrated toward service. education, and consciousness-expanding technology. The same wealth once hoarded to suppress the many will be redirected to uplift the forgotten. This isn't idealism. This is prophecy, and it is unfolding now. The consciousness that made this transformation possible is not locked in a book or a temple. It moves through you. It is you. It moves through every chosen one who decided that truth was more important than comfort. It flows through every soul who chose to speak when they were told to be silent. And it echoes through every moment you decided to heal instead of hate. That's why the field is shifting. That's why no amount of force, money, or disinformation can stop this movement. Because it wasn't created through domination, it was created through love. Ephesians 5:3 reminds us, "But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light." The tunnels, the boats, the weapons, they are all being exposed. But more importantly, so are the beings who used them. What this agent saw in those final moments wasn't just criminality, it was spiritual depravity. They witnessed beings who had systematically severed themselves from their own humanity, trading compassion for control, empathy for efficiency, truth for terror. The tunnels weren't just hideouts, they were spiritual laboratories where consciousness was harvested, where sacred energy was extracted, traded, and corrupted. The boats weren't merely escape vehicles, they were floating strongholds where frequency-based experiments were conducted to suppress awakening and neutralize human potential. The darkness was deeper than crime. It was a conscious inversion of divine law. And yet, you stood against it, not with an army, but with alignment, not with weapons, but with wisdom, not through institutions, but through intimacy with God. You were never meant to fight their war by their rules. You were meant to raise a frequency so high, so pure, so steady that their systems imploded just trying to contain it. Psalm 18:28 speaks truth over your life. You, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. You walked through the darkest places emotionally, spiritually, physically, and you lit a fire that now cannot be extinguished. That is your reward. That is your legacy. That is why the investigation succeeded. And that is why the new world is already forming inside of you, around you, and through you, chosen one. Do you understand now how deeply your transformation has reshaped not just your reality, but the collective landscape of the world? The agents saw it with their own eyes. They didn't just witness the collapse of a network, they witnessed the rise of a new kind of power, a power birthed from your healing. Where the cult used trauma to fragment consciousness, you used trauma to bring yourself back into divine wholeness. Where they weaponized isolation to break the human will, you entered that silence and found God waiting for you. Where they sowed confusion to generate compliance, you distilled clarity that became liberation. You inverted every tactic they relied upon. They planted destruction in your path and you grew revelation in its place. Romans 8:28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Every attack that was meant to shatter you only sharpened your discernment. Every plan to isolate you became an invitation to deeper intimacy with divine intelligence. Every moment you felt misunderstood or dismissed was actually a divine recalibration, positioning you where no enemy could reach and no lie could take root. You didn't just survive their weapons, you reversed them. Take Nelson Mandela, decades in prison, stripped of freedom, silenced by an empire, and yet that isolation became preparation. He emerged with clarity, not bitterness, Vision, not vengeance. That's what you've done. You were put in emotional and spiritual captivity by this system, but instead of being crushed, you ascended. The very tactics they used to control millions could not hold you, and in that, their defeat was sealed. As the tunnels were compromised, the cult turned to their final tricks, activating sleeper cells in media, planting distraction through manufactured outrage, false controversies, and manipulated identities. But chosen one, your consciousness had already elevated beyond their frequency. You saw through it all. You refused to feed it. They planned chaos. But your steadiness created stillness in the field. And that stillness became the loudest threat of all. Their maritime escape routes, once their safest exit, were shut down by perfect divine coordination. When they tried to incite false flag events to disrupt legal proceedings and introduce martial law, they failed. Their energy was exhausted. Their momentum evaporated. Their final cards became confessions. Isaías 41, 10 declares. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. And indeed, you were strengthened for this moment. They threatened families. They sent psychic interference. But spiritual intelligence had already covered those involved in truth. There were angelic protocols in place, protection wrapped in obedience, shields forged in sacred agreements. You were one of the anchors. You held the frequency steady, even when fear surrounded you like smoke. Each failed attempt by the cult only added weight to the mountain of evidence now unignorable. And each time they reached in desperation, divine intelligence revealed them more clearly. They weren't simply being judged by a court. They were being exposed by universal law. Truth had activated cause and effect. The karmic wheel had turned, and you, chosen one, had helped position it with your choices, one small act of integrity at a time. 2 Corinthians 10, 4 tells you, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. That divine power flowed through you, subtle, patient, unstoppable. You didn't need a badge to deliver justice. Your alignment with truth was the court. Your clarity was the sword. Your resilience was the sentence. Think of whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, targeted, condemned, exiled, and yet the consciousness they helped shift cannot be undone. You've done the same, not by revealing state secrets, but by embodying eternal ones. The truth you carry isn't on paper, it's in your frequency, it's in your eyes, your energy, your discernment. That is why, no matter how hard they tried, the cult could not hide. Because they weren't just being tracked by agents, they were being felt by prophets. What the agent now knows, and what continues to stir deep, holy gratitude in their spirit, is that none of this was about individual success. Their badge, their title, their bravery, it was all a vessel for something greater. Their awakening was not isolated, it was collective. Their breakthrough wasn't born of tactics, but of alignment. Alignment with the morphic field of awakened beings like you, who had quietly and consistently been preparing the energetic space long before any file was opened or warrant was signed. Psalm 91:7 says, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. That protection surrounded them, not because they earned it with strategy, but because you built it with sacrifice. Every time you chose silence over retaliation, every time you chose presence over panic, every time you remained rooted in your divine assignment while chaos raged around you, Your spiritual work became countermeasures to systems that once seemed untouchable. This is how real transformation unfolds. Not through conquest, but through coherence. Not through dominance, but through devotion. Not through manipulation, but through meaning. The miracle is that awakened beings like you shift physical reality without needing to control it. You shift it by refusing to be owned by it. Think of Mahatma Gandhi. He didn't command armies. He didn't build corporations. But through alignment with spiritual principle, he dismantled an empire. You, chosen one, walk that same path. Quiet power, holy rebellion. Your impact is in the field, in the cracks of systems, in the whispered prayers of those too afraid to speak. And yet, it's all working, because you refused to betray your soul. John 14:12 tells us, "Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these." That's not metaphor. That's your mantle. You've carried this awakening not with arrogance, but with responsibility. And now the world sees the result. The cult has been defeated, not by brute strength, but by spiritual coherence, not by force, but by faith. The legal system did its part, but only because the spiritual system you upheld made it possible. The tunnels are now closed, their rituals exposed, their chains undone. And the boats that once sailed in secrecy are now docked in judgment. But you are rising. You are just beginning. The agent continues to speak your name in reverence, because they know, without your courage, your frequency, your unwillingness to break their victory would never have happened. Galatians 6:9 urges. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. You didn't give up, and now the harvest is coming not just for you, but for everyone who has been bound under deception. The field is open, the veil is torn, and the system they built to enslave humanity is collapsing under the weight of truth. Beloved, chosen one, as we stand together at the close of this message, take a moment to feel the weight of what has been revealed, not as a burden, but as a birthright. Everything you have endured, everything you've risen above, has not been wasted. The trauma that once nearly broke you became the lens through which you now see deception before it manifests. The healing that cost you everything became the strength others now draw from. Silently, the seasons of isolation that felt unbearable were really divine appointments, carving out sacred space so your inner voice, God's voice, could become unmistakable. Every insult, every dismissal, every attempt to silence you only trained your spirit to speak with unshakable clarity. And every ounce of persecution you endured was forging spiritual authority that no one can manufacture and no enemy can counterfeit. The collapse of the old world isn't theory anymore. It's happening, just as the hieroglyphics predicted, just as the whispers of divine consciousness have confirmed again and again. Systems of secrecy and control are crumbling. You are not only witnessing this transition, you are causing it. With your presence, with your prayers, with your patience. The new paradigm, one built on transparency, justice, cooperation, and spiritual maturity, isn't some distant future. It is rising now through those who have awakened, and you are among the first flames lighting that path for others. The gratitude that flows to you, some spoken, some silent, is just the beginning. Heaven knows what you've carried, and heaven will honor what you've released to make space for truth. You are not merely surviving history, you are shaping it. The story continues through your breath, your choices, your voice, your vibration. You carry codes that will awaken rooms, cities, nations. Even when you speak softly, your life is now a living message, one that confirms that divine justice is not only possible, but inevitable. And the awakening you've helped spark, it will not be stopped. It is already in motion, rippling across timelines, touching souls you've never met and might never see. But they will feel you. They will recognize the frequency you've helped anchor into this earth. Thank you for walking this sacred path. Thank you for staying the course when it made no sense. Thank you for enduring the silence, the shadows, the spiritual warfare, so others could find their way to the light. Your presence here means more than words could ever express. If this message has affirmed something in your spirit, and you feel led to support the continuation of work like this, we gratefully welcome your donation through the Super Thanks feature. It is never expected, but deeply appreciated, and whether you give or simply lend your presence, your time, your energy, we are truly, sincerely thankful for you. You are seen, you are loved, you are protected, and you are blessed. I speak divine favor over your life, favor that opens doors no man can shut, restores what was stolen, heals what was wounded, and multiplies what was planted in secret. May peace follow your steps. May wisdom guard your choices. May supernatural provision surround you in every season. And may the next chapter of your life carry the unmistakable imprint of divine reward. The world may not yet know your name, but heaven does. And soon, the world will see what heaven already crowned. Amen. And so it is.